let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career.
Sure. Well, I'm an artist. Right now, I'm primarily drawing comics. That's kind of my main gig right now. When I
Yeah.
was younger, growing up, I was always a huge comic head. I was really big into comics. I really wanted to draw comics, that kind of thing. But I kind of ended up getting distracted a little bit, and I got into animation. I sort of fell into that. Actually, I'll just go way back. The first thing I kind of did was back in high school. I did a self-published comic with some friends of mine, and it actually did pretty well. But that ended up leading to somebody who was opening up an animation studio in my area, seeing it and being like, "Hey, I'll give this guy a job as a cleanup artist on at the studio thing." I ended
Yes.
up kind of falling into animation accidentally, and I started working there, and that sort of I weaved sort of in and out of animation and also games. Eventually, I moved overseas, and then I started working in games, doing concept art and storyboards and this kind of stuff, and just sort of bounced around in those industries until I guess a few years ago, where I started really wanting to get back into comics, and eventually I did a few projects, and then one of them eventually led to the main thing that I'm working on right now, which is a series called Silverwing. And it's a trilogy. There's three books in the series. There's Silverwing, Sunwing, and then Firewing. And it's kind of a YA dark fantasy adventure story for younger readers, but still for adults too, because it's really cool. That's kind of my main thing right now is working on this series, which is great. I really love it. And it's nice to kind of do comics. And it's something very different from what I thought I would be doing. I would have never thought that I'd be doing a YA fantasy animal story, but it's really cool. And I dig it. That's kind of where I'm at the moment. And yeah, so that's kind of the quick ABCs of how I kind of ended up where I've
Yeah.
ended up.
What
Yeah.
was the what was that self-published comic you made in high school?
Oh man, it was called Hallowed Night. And it was actually the writer of it he's an excellent writer. He's continued on and he's written a ton of stuff and he's quite successful. Named
Wow.
Arthur Slade. And he was kind of in the area and the artist as well, doing the pencils on the book. Was
Oh,
very talented as well. And I was kind of the kid on the project. So I was doing the inking and then later the coloring. And so this was back in, I'm old, right? This was back in 1993 or four, something like that when we did it.
Mhm.
And there was kind of this indie boom in comics in the 90s. And we sort of rode that wave a little bit. But we put out this book. I should say they did all the hard work. But they put out this book and it did really well. I think the first issue sold like 1,500 copies or something like that. And it was kind of back in the day when you could sort of just get an ad in Previews magazine and then through Diamond or whatever it would get distributed. And anyway, that story itself was about I want to describe it as Highlander type thing. It was about end of the world apocalypse. You've got this, I think it was a Norman knight who's sort of brought back for the dead or something. Honestly, I kind of forget it a little bit. It's been so long. But there was like three or four issues on it. And it was kind of the first thing I ever really did, which is kind of cool because I was so young when I did it. But yeah, it was my first sort of introduction. Before that, as a kid, I'd obviously like you find a photocopier and you make your own comics and this kind of thing. But
Yeah.
this was like pre-internet, like analog, old school comic book making where physical print was the only choice. There's no webtoons. There's no webtoons, no webcomics back then. But at the same time, you could seem to reach a lot of people because there was such a big appetite for comics at that time
I
in
feel
the
like
90s.
it was easier to entertain people back then. Everyone's attention span is fried these days.
It's true. Everybody's brains are fried and polluted with just too much noise. And it really, I do think that it is true back then that people were maybe less cynical or maybe more open. And there was just more of an appetite. There was more of a culture of collecting things where people would want to physically collect something. And the way
Mhm.
that people consume things was just very different. Now, when you like flitter by a post on Instagram, it's so quick that it just
Yeah.
has no registration and no real oomph. It has no weight. It's just meaningless. And it's a shame because you have all this beautiful art. People put all this work into everything and it just flies by in a
Mhm.
microsecond. And it's just like this hollow experience. Whereas if you buy something and you live with it on your shelf,
Mhm.
it's imbued with meaning at that point. I'm still stuck in the physical world. I don't know. I have to play in this world. Obviously, we
Uh-huh.
all have to. We're all forced to. But there's something so nice about just the physical media.
Do you think it's harder today to sell comics? Yes.
I don't know. I think maybe I don't know because it's kind of tricky. Say that comic that I was talking about when I was a kid, like we were
Yeah.
complete unknowns, middle of nowhere. We weren't connected to anything. We never had any big, there was no social media back then to advertise anything. So basically, we just took an ad out in this distributor catalog for comics and then ended up selling thousands of copies of this thing. And back then, that wasn't abnormal. That was completely normal. And now the amount of legwork that you would have to do to sell 100 copies is hard.
Yeah.
And that's you've got to hustle and you've got to be a social media influencer somehow, which is an
Yeah.
insane job. So it's like, wait, to even sell these, I have to like have this other job actually where I'm a social media titan. And how do you do that when it takes so much work to actually make the thing you want to sell? I
Mhm.
think it was easier back then, and now I don't know. Well, what do you say? Because now you can reach more people, so it's a little tricky. Technically, now you can reach everybody on the planet, but at the same time, it seems really difficult to fight for their attention, and to get them to actually throw a couple bucks on a thing. Whereas I think maybe years ago that was a little bit easier. And I think there was a broader comic audience. Maybe it's coming back. I don't know. I do feel like the audience has maybe shrunk a little bit for comics. It's cool seeing younger people get into manga and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that it's maybe growing. And I love people bang on stuff like Dogman and kind of the YA stuff, which is what I'm
Yeah.
in. But screw it. I love it because it's young people reading comics. And I
Mhm.
think it's a good thing to have versus just an audience of guys in their 40s and 50s that are living off of memberries all the time and stuck in this loop of, well, the loop of what they liked when they were kids and hoping that
Yeah.
it's just on rails on this thing. You need new people, you need new stuff. And I think
Mhm.
that way back, like when I was big into comics as a teenager in the 90s and stuff, there was a huge appetite for just anything that was different. People would see something and be like, I don't know what this is. Cool.
Mhm.
Now there's a little bit of, I don't know what this is. I'm scared. Oh no, I don't know what it is. That isn't Deadpool. That isn't my IP that I'm in love with and throw money at. It's a bit of a different thing. Whereas I think back then people were more like, I don't know what this is. It looks cool. I like that it's not a kind of a mainstream thing. And then
Mhm.
that's how you end up with this huge indie boom and you have comics like Bone and stuff like that come out of that. I don't know, it's different. It's always changing. And I think that right now it's actually in a really positive space because with all these young kids, they're getting older, they're finding new stuff
Mhm.
and they're big readers. It's really
Yeah.
cool seeing like the book talk world where you've got like all these fantasy ladies into like dragon smut and all this stuff. It's great. You got all these people into all these different things, and
Mhm.
I kind of love it. I'm optimistic long term for sure. I think we're kind of coming out of a weird spot, but I think it's on the upswing for sure.
Who I think is the most afraid of change.
Who's that?
I think people who make movies, because there's always like 500
Mm.
sequels or something. And I'm like, why can't you just, I'm pretty sure there's a writer out there who wants to make something different.
No, I agree. The when people talk about the Marvel stuff, I just kind of glaze over. I'm sure some of it's good if you're into it, but I'm just not. So I used to do storyboards for on Avengers Assemble, this animated cartoon
Mhm.
series in
Yeah.
Vancouver, actually, at a studio there, and it was a great job. It was a really cool gig, and I learned a lot. But that was when I had to watch all the Marvel movies because
Uh-huh.
it's sort of like see how the choreography works and see what they're doing and
Yeah.
lean into that sort of thing, storytelling. And I just never. That was kind of like I did it for work, but not really because I enjoyed it. I did like Guardians. I thought Thor was kind of cool. But yeah, it's it's sort of this rehashing the same thing over and over and over again. And I think the studios just see something and they just go, oh, hey, let's just get Jack Black to do a Jack Black thing, and we'll just make a sequel or a remake or something. And to me, it's really boring. But at the same time, the
Hmm.
flip side of that is you've got lower budget movies that are amazing, that are kind of on the horror side or a little more thinky, that are really good, that low budget, they're probably like 10, $20 million, but they're not like $200 million, you know.